Hello and welcome to another episode of the SMEFocus show, brought to you by FactoryNOW TV. I'm your host, Chris Greenough, and in this series we will focus on SMEs within the British manufacturing sector. Every week we will discuss and analyse the opportunities and challenges for the industry in these unprecedented times. I have worked in the sector for over 26 years, and I am CCO at SDE Technology, one of the leading manufacturers of pressings and assemblies in the UK. As you can hopefully appreciate, this show is very much for manufacturers by manufacturers. My guest today is Ninder Johal, one of the Midlands' leading businessmen working with local government to create wealth for the region. Welcome, Ninder. How are you?
Yeah, good afternoon. Good to speak to you, Chris.
It is indeed. Long time no speak.
Absolutely. Well, we know something got in the way.
Absolutely. So, as you know, it's been a rough ride for many for the manufacturing sector since COVID took hold in the end of March. What do you think the picture is around the region, certainly where you are, and what the business think?
Well, I'll tell you what was interesting. Today I went into the city centre, as in I drove through the city centre, and then on my way back home to try and sort of make it in time for this. And what I didn't take into account was, you know, those bottlenecks we've all had before pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Well, they were all there today. So there's a lot of traffic on the roads, and whether that had a lot to do with the fact that kids are now back, you know, is either here or there. But I think we're slowly getting. I think it was an interesting stat I came across today. So in France, they've had 84% of people back.
Yeah.
Italy was 75%, and I think Germany and somebody else, I can't remember who, was also hovering in the 70%, and the UK is at 35%.
So we've got a long way to go then, yeah?
Long way to go. And so the rest of Europe appears to be back to where they were pre-COVID.
So is that, do you think, because we obviously locked down slightly later, we didn't lock down certainly as quickly as some other European countries, so is it just that time lag, or is it that just we are behind the curve?
Two things. I think one is the time lag, but I think secondly, and I'm sure we'll speak about this later, if you take Germany, it's not as dependent on service industry. It's a lot more manufacturing driven.
Yeah.
So I think therefore the makeup of the two different economies has resulted in, one, how they've recovered. So Germany's recovered much quicker because of its preponderance around manufacturing, and we haven't, because we rely a lot on service industry. So I think that might explain to a certain degree the percentage of people back at work. Because let's face it, you can't run a state-of-the-art manufacturing unless it's all robotized. It's got robots everywhere. You can't run it without people. And so I suspect that might have something to do with it.
And is that, you see that as a reliance that our country has relied on the service sector, and now when we actually need manufacturing, we are years behind with investment, with infrastructure?
Yeah. Listen, 100%. We've only got to go back to the 80s and see the deindustrialization, factories, everything shut. And we morphed into, London became a lot more important because of financial services. And then that sort of got replicated. And of course, we know certain regions, take the North and the Midlands, haven't prospered as much as the South. That's because the preponderance on service industries and financials. So London, financial services capital, it's meant then, and you know, numerous governments, not just the current one, numerous governments never really got that balance of both regional, and I think from an industry perspective, we never got the balance of the sectors right. And look, I'll give you an example. It's an appalling example. So a friend of mine, it's going back a bit, maybe about a decade ago, a friend of mine rang me and said, I need some finance. And I said, why is that? He said, my banks turned me down. And this is interesting, Chris.
Yeah.
My banks turned me down because when they discovered I was going to run a manufacturing outfit, they said they would only lend the money if you would outsource the manufacturing to China or somewhere. And he himself would only concentrate on the manufacturing, the R&D. Sorry, the R&D and the marketing.
Yeah.
So they said, if you can assure us that you're going to outsource the manufacturing, we'll give you the money.
It's
Now,
madness.
and it's that kind of mentality that's kept us back. And of course, that was then our Achilles heel, because what COVID did was it showed our Achilles heel, which was, oh gosh, we rely on the world so much now for everything, particularly essential items. PPE was a classic example.
Yep.
Ventilators was another.
The whole supply
Thing.
chain. The supply chain.
The whole
has been
supply chain, and of
Yep.
course, we saw it back in January when China went into sort of shutdown, and people who were relying on parts from China suddenly had nothing to sell because they couldn't complete their own manufacture. So it was there in the pipeline. You could see it in January, February. And then, of course, it came to bite us. Now the question is, where do we go forward with the manufacturing? Well, look, you can't suddenly now switch on a button.
No.
Because even if you have now the right intent to start manufacturing, there's a lag between getting the finances in place, getting the capital infrastructure in place, and this is the big one now, it's getting the skills in place.
Absolutely.
Because what happened over the 30 years, we lost a lot of skills.
Yeah.
And to get them back, you can't just switch on a button.
So the government have done a lot, obviously, with the furlough scheme. They supported business and they've tried to protect jobs in that manufacturing environment, as in all businesses. And they've come out now with a new Kickstarter scheme. But I wonder what your thoughts are on that, because it's really aimed at, for me, larger businesses. It's wanting to take on 30 or more people, 30 or more vacancies. So how is that really going to help SMEs in this country?
Right. So there's two problems. The first problem is there have to be somebody who's already on universal credit.
Yeah.
So that means they've probably been unemployed for a while. There's a reason why they're unemployed for a while. So the question to ask is, why weren't they taken on pre-COVID? So that's the first question.
Yeah.
Secondly, a small business will have to spend a lot of money training them, which they hadn't done before. So you could ask the question, would they do it now? Thirdly, I think the financial assistance currently just isn't strong enough, because what logically you would do, if I go back to my scenario of losing skills, critically at the moment, you want to hold on to what you've got.
Yeah.
You want to hold on to those critical skills. Would you let go of critical skills and take someone on fresh and spend all their time trying to upskill them? You just wouldn't. You would want to prefer to hold on, and then when the upturn happens, you've still kept it. Now, the last recession, one of the reasons we didn't get mass employment at the last recession is most businesses chose to hold on to their workforce.
Yeah.
And in return, the reason we didn't get wage inflation, even though we had full employment, sort of, was that everybody understood they were better getting a job than losing it. So everybody did their bit. The employers continued to hold people. The employees didn't insist on huge wage increases. So we had sort of full employment. So now the question is, the question is, would you release people who are highly skilled and then take on totally unskilled people and spend a lot of time trying to skill them? Doesn't make sense.
You certainly wouldn't. But also, how does it work where an SME wants to take on 1 or 2 people and you can't take on any less than 30? So you have to join some sort of membership group, and then you've got all the bureaucracy and all the slowdown that happens. SMEs are going to get fed up. They're just not going to bother. So I think the take-up will be a lot less than people think it will be, certainly central government.
And don't forget also, Chris, 95% of businesses don't belong to a trade body.
Yeah.
They don't belong to a trade body.
And 99% of businesses are SMEs. So don't you think they've pitched the Kickstart completely at the wrong market?
Well, I think the problem has always been, Chris, is that people in Whitehall, and I'm not talking about the MPs now, I'm just talking one step down, Whitehall, the civil servants, with all due respect, have never worked in industry, have never worked at an SME. And so really you're asking researchers, you're asking people who are career civil servants, to come up with something for which they have no experience.
Yeah. Now you spend an awful lot of time with both local and central government. You work with the Black Country LEP. I know you've got a wealth of experience in helping those sort of local governments work with business. What more do you think that local and central government can be doing to support not just big business, but SMEs and get manufacturing kickstarted?
So 2 things. I think the first error this government made, huge error was when they removed the manufacturing advisory service. So what they did there was they took a single approach across the country and completely didn't realize that the black country, for example, our DNA is manufacturing. So they took a single approach, didn't think about regions. So one, I think if you want to encourage risk-taking, support and innovation, then you need those things in place. Listen, some countries around the world have understood how to assist certain sectors. You've only got to look at Silicon Valley and look at what the Americans did with Silicon Valley, poured a lot of money into tech, and look where the Americans are now paying dividends. So I think we've never had a proper industrial strategy. We've been always thinking about financial services, which is fine, but I think anybody in wealth management will tell you need to diversify your income streams. So as a country, we should have a portfolio of sectors and not rely one on the other. So I think going forward, so one is devolve. So government should say to local government, you do what's right. So in the black country and surrounding, we know manufacturing is important. Here's some money, spend it on the sectors that work well in your areas. There's no point sending money for manufacturing, with all due respect to London, but send it here. So devolved, more devolved money, more decision making locally for local businesses and local government to decide where to spend it. Thirdly, encourage local councils to work alongside businesses. So the LEPS is one example. And, we should be looking at making that kind of relationship more stronger so that both can work towards it. And I think thirdly, understand, and the government is saying they understand place, in other words, the importance of a place. And they're obviously emphasizing the importance of leveling up. But if you want to level up and you want a balanced economy and a balanced country, let people locally spend money where they want. So, our area, black country, is manufacturing. Give us the money. Let us develop our own skills. Let us develop our own international strategy markets. And off we go.
And it's about empowering that local government or the LEP or the whoever it is within that region who knows the region. They're the better ones who can make decisions on spending that money rather than central government.
So we will know. We will know who the best businesses are. We will know because we're in the locality. We will know how best to get a great return on investment so that the money goes back to central London in terms of government to spend again. But I think one of the biggest problems has been for the last 30 years is everything likes to be driven centrally from London. The problem is, if you spend all your life in London, you're not really going to have an understanding of how the rest of the country works. And that, I think, has been a major failure.
And we're running up to the end of the year, obviously Brexit looming. The scenario of a no deal is looking more and more likely. What are your thoughts? What can we do?
Okay, it's back to always government talking to business. And I think for too long, certainly the last, 4 or 5 years, I think business has been sidelined when it came to central government talking to business. So I think that's been a real big problem. They've worked with businesses and business organizations quite well through COVID. And there's been a great number of policies that have worked and they've tested and asked and understood sectors. But I think when it comes to Brexit, my impression is that it's ideology before the economy, personally. I think it's even worse now than it would be otherwise, simply because I think businesses have taken such a battering from COVID. I mean, a real we just talked about 37% return, 35%. The last thing businesses now need is not only they're just about coping with COVID, is now to suddenly find another parallel uncertainty. Because people still don't know how COVID is going to pan out. We still don't know if there's going to be a second outbreak or a spike. So now an added complication comes on, which is Brexit. And listen, anybody who works in automotive knows the importance of Brexit. Anybody who works in aerospace knows the importance of Brexit because it's just-in-time management. It's goods flowing back and forth with no tariffs, no barriers. If that comes in, and I'm hearing rumours that we could end up with a hard border in Ireland, so there's the political side of how that might end up. Now, I have sympathy with state aid. I can see why they're saying, well, we should have our own decision making as to which business to help, which not to. But I think it's always in the detail. And when you're negotiating, Chris, as you know, it's the big picture stuff. You've got to keep an eye on the big picture and then sometimes compromise on the finer points. But it's not looking good. WTO is what we fall back to, or some kind of modeling based on WTO. But you know something, I suppose the riposte, I think, from government would be, well, this has been now dragging on for 3 years. And really, businesses had plenty of time to understand that it could be a no Brexit, and you have no excuse now. I mean, the amount of businesses I know stocked up at least on 4 times. They thought that there was a cliff coming.
Yes, and they're doing it again now, ready for January. Yeah,
and they're getting ready for the cliff, over the cliff now. I think my worry is we've taken a battering when it comes to GDP growth. My worry is that can both either the EU and the UK take that risk of further damage to our respective economies, bearing in mind of where we are now
with COVID. Yeah,
the logic should be that we would find. But I think if you ask most business will say, I mean, the transition period's gone. Most business will say, do a deal. And I think most, even Brexiteers, would probably say, we want a deal. But we'll see.
We'll see. And just finally, have you got some positive news, things that you're doing within your
yeah. Well, one of the things we've done is we've tried